Well. The Texans face another crushing defeat on primetime. The Texans take an L to the Detroit Lions on prime time. We are losers when it comes to prime time. And I had a couple of concerns about this game. I did not have very high hopes, but to go into this game and take a L like the Texans did, it is depressing. Very much depressing. The Texans take an L on prime time. Another meltdown, another second half collapse. The Texans went scoreless in the second half and they lost to the Detroit Lions 26 to 23 on a last second field goal. Was the offensive line changes, were they any better? Did Bobby Slowick improve? Were the concerns about the play calling adjustments taken care of? I'm going to talk about that in this episode of Sports Social Live. Let's get into it. So, looking at the game, the Lions moved to 8-1 and the Texans moved to 6-4. We still have the lead in the division, but does it really matter? Yes, because we'll get another hat, we'll get another win in the AFC South, which is not doing well for the NFL. I'm surprised that the Texans are even kind of just going around, and it's hard to see D'Amico have this fake positivity. I know he's a good guy, a good coach, but I'm so concerned about the team. It seems as if these second half collapses are a testament to a few things. You have to look at the culture around the offense. You can't say the entire team because the defense played a solid game. The defense had a solid game. They are a top tier defense, and they showed that. 5 interceptions, phenomenal defensive plays. You playing against one of the top teams, you're going to get scored on, especially if your offense cannot score in the second half. So, looking into the Houston Texans a little bit more, I have to just expand on the second half collapse from the Texans. The Texans had just looked miserable in the second half, and it sucks. The Texans' second half drives went interception, punt, punt, fumble, missed field goals, and the end of the game. That was the Texans' second half. It was terrible. A stark difference from the first half, which the defense pretty much kept you in the game. The Houston Texans are, it's crazy, a tale of two halves. When you look at the Houston Texans, you just have to think, is this the identity of the Texans? This wasn't just a bad half of football. It's becoming the defining characteristic of the Texans. And as a fan, it's just damning. You just look at it and how do we fix it? You see the answer, but it just can't be fixed. The Texans have only scored count them, three touchdowns in the second half all season. That is piss poor. That is terrible. And as an offensive coordinator, you have to just be concerned about what the Texans are doing. This is a direct indictment of Bobby Slowick's coaching ability. I want to say D'Amico has to step up here, but Bobby Slowick has to call a better game. And that's just what has to happen. Bobby Slowick is on jury, he's on trial, and the Houston Texans fan, D'Amico and Nick Casario, should be the jury. And McNair should be the judge. We look at this game and what's been happening in the second half for the few past weeks, and it's just sad. I was sitting at the game next to a San Francisco 49ers fan, and the going into the second half, one, I was feeling really good. Two, I had to tell him, I was like, hey man, the Lions will come back. I didn't think the Lions would win, but I knew they would come back. And it was just a depressing thing to be true, and it came true. Watching the Lions just come back on the team. So what we have to do is just really analyze the problem. We found out that King Green was the problem on the interior offensive line. Check. We found out the offensive line is terrible. Check. Now we're peeling back the onions, and you really got to see who is bad. Like, we're finding more symptoms. We found the symptoms of the problem. Now we're actually getting to the problem, and it has to be Bobby Slowick. The his tempo, his adjustments, his play calling, a double reverse. What are you doing, dude? It's very sad to see. We suck at offense. It's bad. When you look at the EPA ratings, the Texans make the wrong call almost all the time when you're in obvious passing downs or obvious rundowns. The Texans are piss poor on offense, and it is suck. And it is just there. You have to look at a couple of things, right? And a couple of things I want to look at is the offensive line. We said we made changes on the offensive line, but the O line changes just weren't enough for the Texans. I think you gave Bobby an excuse. King Green's play gave Bobby an excuse, gave Juice Scruggs an excuse. It gave the offensive line an excuse because, as we mentioned before, Jeremy and I, on a few episodes, we discussed the offensive line and finding where the issue was. And King Green was stuck out like a sore thumb. And then you kind of thought, was it Kenyon Green really just playing bad, or was it Kenyon Green impacting everyone else? So we found out that Kenyon Green was playing bad. It was impacting those around him. Cool. He was a cancer. He self eliminated by getting injured. Now he's on injury reserve. So looking into all those things, Kenyon Green was that symptom. And I think when you keep on going and peeling back the layers, then you go to the interior offensive line. The interior offensive line was another symptom, and they're not good. They're quite frankly overpaid and overdrafted. So then you peel back another layer, and I think we are getting to the problem. Bobby Slowick just cannot call an offense to fit his personnel. Yeah, he might be good at calling the offense for a top tier offensive line on Madden, right? He might be good at that, but he cannot call an offense to fit his personnel that he has. His personnel that he has is not the best personnel. So you cannot run double reverses. You cannot run lateral passes because your offense can't do it. They simply can't do it. You have to get the fat dudes downhill rolling and hope that your running back and your athlete can make a play. The Texans have to call plays for their personnel. And a prime example of that is on the defensive side of the ball when D'Amico Ryans was able to make a call for his personnel. He's able to adjust to his personnel. D'Amico had Petrie playing at an elite level. You got to think about it. Petrie was playing great. Lasser, dog, playing great. He got the most out of Hanson and Hewitt, and 5 defensive starters out at one point in time. That is how you coach to your personnel and coach to your strengths. Bobby Slowick has showed us time after time again that he's unable to coach to his personnel and coach to his strengths. Again, it's Sports Social Live at Sports Social TV on X. I like talking Texans. I'm the number one Texans global fan. I do this from all over the world. And happy Veterans Day, belated Veterans Day to everybody. So as we peel back the layers on the offensive line, I just have to say that I think they played a tad bit better, but they still showed signs of a lack of tenacity and a lack of grit and just some plain stupidity because you had Titus Howard with that dumb play at the end. I just think it was dumb. It's kind of baffling to say the least. The Texans driving for a potential game winner, game going ahead score, and Howard inexplicably tried to, I guess, make the Alabama play. I don't know. Everybody has theories, but D'Amico spoke on that in his press conference today. But that was stupid. Like it just showed how inept the offensive line is. I guess if you want to be a gamer, you're trying to make a play, but dude, you just haven't been playing well enough to even do something like that. The post game conference with D'Amico was said it all. I mean, he said he wasn't trying to take the ball, but you gotta think about it. That was pretty damning. That was a bad play from Titus Howard, and the offensive line just sucks. Despite Nick Caserio saying that the offensive line struggles were a lazy narrative, I think it was a fair narrative, right? You had to talk about that. It's an issue, and they have to meet the problem head on. D'Amico being a player's coach, Caserio taking care of his team. I think we just have to identify the problem, give the fans something. We went a whole week. I don't care about the injuries. Everybody kind of mad about how the injuries were played out. It only matters when they get on the field, so I'm not going to care about that. But at least give the fans some insight, because I think this is something you just getting the wave started. The stadium's getting full earlier. You're getting these things. Keep the momentum by kind of working with your fans at least. And I have to say this with Bobby Slowick and the offensive line, and we go back to the offensive line, and Bobby Slowick. I repeated myself twice. You got to think Bobby Slowick has to set the tone. Bobby Slowick has to set the pace, and Bobby Slowick has to lead the offense, right? So, how do they find themselves? How does Bobby Slowick find himself as a play caller? Is it easy for him to turn on? Answer that question down below in the chat. I don't think it's easy for Bobby Slowick to turn it on, because if it were, he would have scored in the second half. He would have drawn up easy plays. I just don't think he has it in him. He is having a challenge, and it's going to be tough for him to be successful. And then you just got to look at you have to question yourself at this point. Are the Texans, what are the Texans? So that identity crisis portion of the Texans, I think people are talking about it like, what are they? I don't think they're fraud. Let's be clear. I think they have a problem, and they are trying to find a solution to the problem. D'Amico is a player's coach. He's a people's person. I think it's time to lay the hammer down, of course, and just make a play. I don't think changing out Gerard, changing out the offensive coordinator now is the time. But people have done it this season. People have done it in the past. I just think D'Amico needs to make, or somebody on the staff should just be making those decisional references or recommendations to D'Amico. I think that they need somebody that's just strictly situational play calling, and let Bobby call a play. Hey, Bobby, this will be a run play. Don't do any of that sideways BS, and call the play. That's just what we need from the Houston Texans. Maybe that'll help him out, give him more confidence as he calls plays. I think also he leans on his superstar athletes when you can't always do that down the stretch. Every team's hurt, every team's banged up. The best ability is availability or durability. You saw every team has hurt players, and this narrative and rhetoric goes across the league. But you look at Nico Collins being out, and then you had Joe Mixon, and then you had Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. I think Bobby wanted to lean on these guys so much that he wasn't able to create his own identity. So how, if he doesn't have an identity, how's the offense going to have an identity? You have a young sophomore season quarterback, sophomore season receiver, number 1B, 1A. He has to play now, not that deep. Uh, young tight ends, a young tight end in Stover. I, it's just a lot of work for Bobby Slowick to get out there. So mentally, I think we have to look into the mental game for the Texans. How are they going to play this going into next week? And if you think about next week, they're going into the game to play the Dallas Cowboys on another primetime game. I've seen different lines open up. I'm not going to talk about the betting lines, but I just want to talk about the Cowboys game as we go forward. The Cowboys game is one of those games where I don't think the Texans will do well. I I have to believe it to see it. I'm not pessimistic about the Texans, but I am not thinking this is going to go well for the Texans. This is one of those games where on prime time the Cowboys will step up. They will show the Texans that I mean they're just an NFL team, man. So I think the Cowboys are going to step up this week. They're going to kind of make it tough for the Texans. It's going to be a rough game. Michael Parsons, you have the O line and D lines. I mean, they're rather tattered. Um, I don't see the Houston Texans having an easy game this week. I don't think they will have an easy game until they figure out their identity. Um, it's just going to be a difficult game for the Texans. I think at most, I think if they have the 8 points, I'll take the Cowboys +8 in this game, and that's just me being pessimistic. I think they have the Cowboys +7.5 right now. So my early betting odds, I would take the Cowboys right now. plus 7.5. I think it's going to be a 1-score game at most. Texans are going to have to find their identity. That might be good for them to get that 1 score, and hopefully that 1-score lead comes in the second half. They're able to break this just lull that they're having, and then go into the next game, and then hopefully into the bye week and being successful. I'm a Texans fan. The number one global Texans fan is at Sports Social Live. Follow us, like, subscribe. I love talking Texans. I'm going to get back on a steady battle rhythm once I get a little bit settled from traveling. I'm going to holler at you tomorrow. Salute.